The lost supercarrier. The Galactic Coalition Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 species gathered for what many considered humanity's funeral. Admiral Zethkar of the Vorthon Empire adjusted his ceremonial armor, the metallic plates catching the dim light as he prepared to deliver the final verdict on Earth's membership status. The human vessel Prometheus has been missing for 18 standard months. His voice echoed through the vast chamber, each word carefully measured. No distress signals, no debris fields, no survivors. The Coalition's most advanced deep space tracking systems have found nothing but empty void where their supercarrier should be. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The Aquarian ambassador's gills fluttered with what humans would recognize as anxiety, while the crystalline Zephyrians chimed in harmonic disapproval. Everyone knew what this meant. Without the Prometheus, humanity had lost its seat at the galactic table. The massive supercarrier hadn't just been humanity's pride and joy, it represented their entire contribution to the Coalition's defense forces. While other species brought exotic technologies, energy weapons that could crack planets, or shields that bent reality itself, humans had brought something unexpected: tactical genius, wrapped in raw determination, and a ship that somehow punched far above its weight class. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the human delegation section, her uniform crisp despite the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. As the senior surviving human officer in Coalition space, the responsibility for her species' reputation rested squarely on her. She watched the proceedings with barely contained frustration, knowing that without the Prometheus, humanity would be reduced from a respected military partner to a minor client species begging for scraps. The human contribution to our recent conflicts has been adequate, continued Admiral Zethkar, and Sarah's jaw tightened at the diplomatic insult. Adequate. The Prometheus had single-handedly turned the tide in 3 major engagements, using tactics so unconventional that enemy fleets had simply stopped functioning as cohesive units. Human crew members had boarded enemy dreadnoughts while their ship was still firing, conducted repairs under enemy fire that should have been impossible, and somehow convinced enemy crews to surrender through methods the Coalition's psychological warfare experts still couldn't understand. The Kylorian representative, a being that looked like a walking tree made of living metal, spoke up with a voice like grinding gears. Perhaps it is time to acknowledge that humanity's military approach, while spirited, lacks the sophistication required for modern galactic warfare. Their loss of the Prometheus only confirms what many of us have long suspected. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She'd served aboard the Prometheus for 5 years before being transferred to Coalition headquarters. She knew every deck, every system, every member of that crew. Captain Marcus Rodriguez had been like a father to her. Chief Engineer Thompson could make miracles happen with spare parts and determination, and the tactical team, led by Commander Davis, had minds that worked in ways that made enemy AI systems crash from pure confusion. But now they were gone. Vanished during what should have been a routine patrol of the outer spiral, where reports of unknown ships had been filtering in for months. The last transmission had been Captain Rodriguez's calm voice, reporting they were investigating an anomalous energy signature near a dead system. Then nothing but silence that had stretched on for 18 months of frantic searching. "The humans will retain their embassy status," Admiral Zethkar announced, his tone making it clear this was an act of charity rather than respect. However, their military partnership is hereby suspended pending reconstitution of their forces. The diplomatic language couldn't hide the truth. Humanity was being kicked out of the big leagues. Their colonies would lose Coalition protection, their trade routes would be relegated to secondary status, and their voice in galactic affairs would become a whisper that could be safely ignored. Sarah stood to address the council, knowing it was probably futile, but unable to remain silent. "Honorable delegates, I request permission to speak for the human delegation." Admiral Zethkar gestured with one of his four arms. "The Council recognizes Commander Chen." "The crew of the Prometheus represents the best of humanity," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "They've saved Coalition lives, protected Coalition colonies, and brought honor to every species in this alliance. To declare them lost and abandon them dishonors not just humanity, but the principles this coalition was founded on." The Kylorian representative's metallic leaves rustled with what might have been amusement. "Commander, your passion is admirable, but passion cannot change facts. Your ship is gone. Your people are gone. The galaxy has moved on." "Have they?" Sarah asked, and something in her tone made several delegates lean forward. "Because our long-range monitoring stations have been picking up some very interesting energy signatures from the direction of the outer spiral. Signatures that match Prometheus's unique fusion drive harmonics." A moment of silence fell over the chamber. Then Admiral Zethkar spoke carefully. "Commander, are you suggesting that your vessel has survived whatever befell it? Our own long-range sensors have detected nothing." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, it was genuine. "Admiral, with all due respect, your sensors aren't designed to detect human engineering. We build our ships differently, remember? What you call adequate tactics, we call thinking outside the box. What you call impossible repairs, we call Tuesday afternoon. And what you call lost, we might just call fashionably late." The chamber erupted in discussion, delegates speaking rapidly in a dozen different languages and communication methods. But Sarah wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Her communicator was buzzing with an incoming priority message, and when she looked down at the display, her heart nearly stopped. Long-range sensors had indeed detected something, a massive energy signature moving through hyperspace, heading directly for Coalition space. The signature pattern was unmistakably human, but there was something else mixed in with it, something that made the Coalition's most advanced analysis systems display error messages and question marks. "Delegates," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I believe this session may need to be postponed. It appears we have an incoming transmission." The main display at the front of the chamber flickered to life, showing the swirling colors of hyperspace. In the center of the image, a familiar shape was emerging from the cosmic static. Long and predatory, bristling with weapon systems and radiating the kind of confidence that came from surviving the impossible, the UCS Prometheus was coming home. But even from the grainy long-range image, it was clear that the ship had changed. Additional structures jutted from its hull like metallic growths, and energy patterns danced around it that no Coalition scientist had ever catalogued. Whatever had happened to the Prometheus in the 18 months it had been missing, it hadn't been sitting idle. Admiral Zethkar stared at the screen, his four arms hanging limp at his sides. That is impossible. Our deep scans showed no signs of human technology in that region." Sarah's smile widened. "Admiral, the first thing you learn about humans is that we don't really care what's supposed to be impossible. We find it more like a suggestion." The transmission quality improved as the Prometheus moved closer to the Coalition's sensor network. More details became visible, and with each passing moment, the assembled delegates grew more silent. The human supercarrier wasn't just intact. It looked like it had been rebuilt by someone who understood human engineering better than humans themselves. "Council, this is Captain Rodriguez of the UCS Prometheus," a familiar voice crackled through the chamber's speakers. "Requesting permission to dock at Coalition Station Alpha. We have some very interesting things to discuss, and I think you're going to want to hear what we've learned out here." Sarah closed her eyes and felt 18 months of grief and frustration wash away. The Prometheus was home, and from the sound of Captain Rodriguez's voice, They had stories to tell. Admiral Zethkar found his voice first. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Admiral Zethkar. Your ship was declared lost with all hands 18 months ago. What is your status?" "Well, Admiral, that's a bit of a story. The short version is that we ran into some new neighbors out in the outer spiral. The long version is going to require some very strong coffee and probably a few security briefings. But I can tell you this much. The galaxy just got a lot more interesting." The Prometheus was definitely different. As it moved through normal space toward the station, the changes became more obvious. The hull plating had been reinforced with materials that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. Weapon systems that had never appeared in any human design, Mad the Lost Supercarrier, continued. The docking bay fell silent as the UCS Prometheus settled into its berth with mechanical precision that seemed almost eerie. The massive supercarrier had changed in ways that made Coalition engineers shake their heads in bewilderment. What had once been clean human lines now incorporated flowing organic curves that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The docking clamps engaged with a soft harmonic hum that resonated through the station's hull. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck with a crowd of officials, all watching as the first humans in 18 months prepared to disembark. She recognized Captain Rodriguez immediately as he stepped off the gangway, though even he had changed. His movements held a new confidence, and his eyes seemed to hold depths that hadn't been there before. "Rodriguez," Admiral Zethkar approached with careful steps, flanked by security officers from 3 different species. "Report." The human captain smiled, and somehow that simple expression made several alien delegates take involuntary steps backward. "Admiral, we found them. The shipbuilders, the ones your ancient records mention in whispers and warnings, the architects." A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled crowd. Every species in the Coalition had legends about the architects, the mysterious race that had allegedly seeded the galaxy with impossible technologies before vanishing millions of years ago. Most considered them myths, stories told to explain artifacts too advanced for any known civilization. "That's impossible," the Kylorian representative said, his metallic leaves clashing with agitation. "The architects are extinct, have been for longer than recorded history." Captain Rodriguez gestured toward his ship, where human crew members were beginning to emerge. They moved with the same unsettling confidence their captain displayed, and their equipment bore technological features that made Coalition scientists frantically take notes from a safe distance. "Extinct, yes. Gone, no." Rodriguez's explanation came with the patience of someone who had spent months learning to think in impossible concepts. They left something behind, not just artifacts or ruins, but let's call them custodians. Artificial intelligences that have been maintaining their technology and waiting for the right species to come along. Chief Engineer Thompson appeared at Rodriguez's shoulder, and Sarah gasped. The woman had been brilliant before, but now she radiated an almost supernatural understanding of technology. Her uniform incorporated elements that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They were testing us," Thompson said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "For 18 months, they put us through scenarios that pushed human ingenuity beyond every conceivable limit. Every time we found a solution they thought was impossible, they gave us access to more advanced systems." Admiral Zethkar's 4 arms gestured in confusion. "Testing you how? And why?" Commander Davis stepped forward, and Sarah barely recognized him. The tactical officer had always been sharp, but now his eyes held a gleam that suggested he could see patterns in chaos that others couldn't even imagine. "They recreated every major battle in galactic history and asked us to fight them with primitive human weapons and tactics. When we started winning battles that should have been hopeless defeats, they got interested." We beat the Draconian fleet at Vega Prime using nothing but kinetic weapons and creative use of asteroid fields, Rodriguez added with pride. Took down a Void Hunter pack with jury-rigged electromagnetic pulse weapons and coordinated ramming attacks. The custodians had never seen anything like it. Sarah found her voice. What did they want from you? Rodriguez's expression grew serious. They wanted to know if humanity could be trusted with architect technology, not just to use it, but to improve it. The custodians have been maintaining their systems for millions of years, but they've never been allowed to innovate. They can preserve, but they can't create. Thompson pulled out a device that looked like a fusion of human engineering and something that belonged in a fantasy novel. They gave us access to their foundries, let us experiment with materials that exist in 11 dimensions, showed us how to build ships that can think for themselves and weapons that adapt to whatever they're fighting. The Prometheus isn't just repaired, Davis continued, his tactical mind already working on implications. It's been completely rebuilt using architect foundational technology fused with human design philosophy. Every system can modify itself in real time based on combat conditions. The ship literally learns from every encounter and gets better. The implications hit the coalition delegates like a physical blow. Admiral Zethkar staggered, his normally perfect posture failing. You're saying that humanity now has access to architect technology? The most advanced civilization in galactic history? Better than that, Rodriguez said, and his smile held edges that made predators nervous. We've been given permission to improve it. The custodians weren't just testing our tactics, they were evaluating our ability to innovate under pressure. When we started proposing modifications to million-year-old designs that actually worked, they realized something their creators had never anticipated. Which was? Asked the Aquarian ambassador, her gills fluttering with barely controlled panic. That sometimes the best way to preserve something is to let it evolve, Thompson said simply. The architects built amazing things, but they built them to last unchanged forever. Humanity builds things to be improved, modified, and adapted. The custodians had been stagnating for millions of years, and we gave them something they'd never had before, the ability to grow. Captain Rodriguez gestured toward the Prometheus again, where more crew members were emerging. Sarah noticed that several of them were carrying what looked like smaller versions of the ship's new technology, personal devices that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. The custodians made us an offer, Rodriguez continued. They would share their technology with humanity, and we would share our innovation with them. A partnership between human creativity and architect precision. But there was a condition, Davis added, and his tone suggested this was the important part. We had to prove that humanity could be trusted not to abuse this power, so they gave us a test. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of station systems. Admiral Zethkar was the first to find his voice. What kind of test? Rodriguez's expression became grim. 3 days ago, a Devourer fleet entered the outer spiral. 12 planetary consumption vessels escorted by 100 support ships. The kind of force that could sterilize an entire sector before the coalition could mount a response. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Devourers were the galaxy's nightmare, a machine intelligence that consumed worlds for raw materials and left nothing but empty space behind. No coalition force had ever successfully engaged a Devourer fleet and survived. The custodians wanted to see how we would handle a real threat to galactic civilization, Thompson said quietly. So we engaged them. Alone? Admiral Zethkar's voice cracked. A single supercarrier against a Devourer fleet? Not alone, Rodriguez corrected, and gestured toward the docking bay windows. We had some help. For the first time, the assembled delegates noticed the other ships that had accompanied the Prometheus. Sleek vessels that seemed to be built from crystallized thought, their hulls reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with fluid grace that suggested consciousness rather than mere automation. "Meet our new allies," Davis said with satisfaction. "Architect custodian vessels, rebuilt with human innovation and crewed by artificial intelligences that have been waiting millions of years for someone to teach them how to fight dirty." "You fought devourers?" Sarah whispered, unable to believe what she was hearing. "We didn't just fight them," Rodriguez said, and his grin was fierce. "We won. 12 planetary consumption vessels reduced to scrap metal and expanding gas clouds. The custodians learned that sometimes the best defense is an offense that your enemy can't predict, and we learned that architect shielding can be modified to reflect weapon energy back at attackers with compound interest." Thompson held up another impossible device. "Devourer ships are built to consume and process matter efficiently. They're not built to handle matter that processes them back. Human-modified architect nanites can turn a consumption beam into a conversion weapon that breaks down the attacker instead of the target." The coalition delegates stared in stunned silence. A force that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, defeated by a single human vessel and its mysterious allies. The implications were staggering. "The custodians were impressed," Davis continued. "Apparently, in all their simulations, they'd never found a way to defeat devourers without massive losses. We did it without taking significant damage." Admiral Zethkar's voice was barely audible. "How many casualties?" "None," Rodriguez said simply. "The new systems allowed us to disable their weapons and life support without destroying their ships entirely. We actually captured 3 intact consumption vessels and their support craft. The custodians are currently studying Devourer technology to understand how they work." "You captured Devourer ships?" The Kylorian representative's metallic form was vibrating with shock. That's never been done before." "It's never been tried before," Thompson corrected. "Everyone assumes Devourers are unstoppable, so no one tries to stop them. They just run and hope the fleet moves on to easier targets. We decided to see what would happen if someone actually stood and fought smart, instead of running scared." Rodriguez stepped closer to Admiral Zethkar, and something in his posture made it clear that the dynamic between humanity and the coalition had fundamentally shifted. "Admiral, the custodians have made their decision. Humanity has proven we can be trusted with architect technology, and more." The Lost Supercarrier. Conclusion. 6 months after the return of the Prometheus, Coalition space hummed with activity unlike anything seen in recorded history. The massive orbital construction platforms around Earth worked continuously, their foundries producing ships that seemed to bend the laws of physics while maintaining the aggressive functionality that marked human engineering. Commander Sarah Chen, now promoted to Admiral, stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiance, humanity's second architect-enhanced supercarrier. Through the viewport, she could see the impossible sight of human and custodian crews working together, their combined efforts creating vessels that made the old Coalition fleet look like children's toys. "Admiral," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Park from the tactical station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition Command. Admiral Zethkar wishes to speak with you directly." Sarah settled into the captain's chair, still marveling at how the seat seemed to adapt to her body and somehow interfaced directly with her nervous system. The architect technology didn't just respond to commands, it anticipated them, creating a harmony between user and machine that felt almost supernatural. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Zethkar in what appeared to be a heavily secured command bunker. The proud Vorthon looked exhausted, his normally immaculate armor showing signs of hasty repair. "Admiral Chen," he began without preamble, "we need immediate assistance. The Hegemon Empire has launched a full-scale invasion of the Centauri sector. 17 worlds are under attack, and our conventional forces are being systematically destroyed." Sarah leaned forward, her enhanced tactical awareness already processing the implications. The Hegemon Empire had been the coalition's primary external threat for decades, a militaristic civilization that viewed other species as resources to be conquered and exploited. Their fleets were massive, their technology brutal but effective, and their tactics relied on overwhelming force applied without mercy. "What's their fleet strength?" she asked, though the answer was already appearing on her display as the ship's AI systems accessed coalition databases faster than traditional communication could manage. 43 dreadnoughts, 200 cruisers, and over 1,000 support vessels, Zethkar replied, his voice heavy with defeat. "They're using a new type of quantum torpedo that our shields can't deflect. Admiral, they're not just conquering these worlds, they're sterilizing them. Billions of civilians are being killed." Sarah felt the familiar cold fury that had made humans dangerous even before they'd gained access to impossible technology. The thought of civilians being slaughtered while she had the power to stop it made her decision simple. "We'll deploy immediately," she said. "The Defiance, Prometheus, and Retribution are ready for action. We'll also bring 6 custodian vessels and the new experimental units." Admiral Zethkar blinked in confusion. "Admiral, with respect, 13 ships cannot engage a Hegemon fleet of that size. Even with your new technology, the numbers are impossible." Sarah smiled, and anyone who knew human expressions would have recognized the predatory satisfaction in it. "Admiral, the first thing the custodians taught us is that impossible numbers only matter if you fight the kind of war your enemy expects. We're not going to fight a traditional engagement." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to demonstrate why the architects were considered the apex civilization in the galaxy, and why human creativity makes their technology even more dangerous than they ever imagined." 3 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in the Centauri system, where the Hegemon Empire was in the process of systematically destroying the 4th planet in the system. The massive alien dreadnoughts hung in space like predatory mountains, their weapon systems reducing cities to molten craters while their smaller vessels hunted down fleeing civilian ships. Admiral Corvanis, commanding the Hegemon fleet from his flagship Dominator, received the alert about incoming ships with amusement. His intelligence reports had mentioned that the humans possessed some new technology, but 13 vessels against his armada was simply suicide. "Unknown fleet, you are entering a Hegemon Empire military operation," he transmitted on standard channels. "Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." The response came from a human voice that carried undertones of barely controlled violence. "Hegemon fleet, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Colonial Forces. You are engaged in the systematic murder of civilians. Cease your attack immediately and withdraw to your own territory." Corvanis laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Human, you command 13 ships. I command over 1,000. Your mathematics appear deficient." "Our mathematics are just fine," came the reply. "It's your understanding of modern warfare that needs work. This is your final warning." Instead of responding with words, Corvanis opened fire. His entire fleet unleashed a coordinated barrage that should have reduced the human vessels to component atoms in seconds. Quantum torpedoes that could crack continents streaked across space, followed by energy beams that had melted coalition dreadnoughts like butter. The weapons struck the human ships and simply stopped. The quantum torpedoes hung in space for a moment before reversing course and slamming into the Hegemon vessels that had fired them. The energy beams reflected back along their own paths with geometrically increasing intensity, turning Hegemon weapons against their own hulls. "What is this?" Corvanis roared, as his flagship's shields failed under the impact of its own reflected fire. "Architect defensive technology," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Modified with human improvements. Your weapons are now our weapons, Admiral. But don't worry. We brought some original equipment, too." The human ships began moving in patterns that hurt to watch, their hulls shifting and flowing like liquid metal, while their weapon systems deployed arrays that existed in dimensions Hegemon sensors couldn't properly detect. When they fired, reality seemed to twist around their targets. The first hegemon dreadnought didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a perfectly spherical void in space that even light couldn't escape. The second found its hull converted into a form of matter that existed partially outside normal space-time, causing it to phase in and out of reality until its crew abandoned ship in terror. "This is impossible," Corvanus transmitted, his voice cracking as his fleet began to collapse under attacks that defied every principle of physics he understood. "You keep using that word," Admiral Chen responded, and her amusement was audible. "Admiral, let me share something the custodians taught us. The architects didn't just build technology, they built technology that rebuilds reality to match their intentions. And humans have a talent for having very creative intentions. The custodian vessels accompanying the human fleet weren't firing conventional weapons either. Instead, they were projecting fields that turned the hegemon ship's own structural integrity against them. Dreadnoughts that had withstood centuries of warfare found their hulls spontaneously reorganizing into geometric patterns that couldn't support their own mass. But the most devastating attacks came from the experimental vessels, ships that had been designed jointly by human engineers and architect custodians. These vessels didn't fight. They simply decided that the hegemon fleet shouldn't exist in this particular configuration, and reality obediently rearranged itself to match their decision. Within 20 minutes, the massive hegemon armada had been reduced to scattered debris and fleeing survivors. Corvanus found himself alone on his flagship, his entire fleet either destroyed or converted into inert matter by weapons that operated on principles his civilization couldn't comprehend. "Admiral Corvanus," came Admiral Chen's voice, now carrying the authority of absolute victory. "Your fleet is neutralized. Your invasion is over. You have two choices: surrender and withdraw to your own territory, or discover what happens when humans get creative with architect prison technology." The hegemon admiral looked around his damaged bridge, seeing the faces of his crew reflected in displays showing impossible scanner readings. His entire understanding of warfare had just been shattered by 13 ships that fought like they were rewriting the fundamental laws of the universe. "We surrender," he transmitted, his voice barely audible. "Good choice," Admiral Chen replied. "Custodian vessels will escort your surviving ships to the edge of Coalition space. Admiral, I suggest you inform your leadership that the balance of power in this galaxy has changed permanently. The Coalition is no longer defenseless, and civilian populations are under our protection." As the human fleet began rescue operations for the survivors of both sides, Admiral Zethkar's image appeared on Admiral Chen's private communication channel. The Vorthon's expression mixed awe, gratitude, and barely concealed fear. "Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Coalition, I thank you. But I must ask, what has humanity become?" Sarah considered the question carefully, looking out at ships that seemed to exist partially in dreams and partially in engineering, crewed by humans who could think in impossible concepts and custodians who had learned to innovate after millions of years of stagnation. "We've become what we always were, Admiral. The species that looks at impossible situations and asks, what if we tried it anyway? The difference is that now we have tools that match our ambitions." She paused, watching as human and custodian crews worked together to provide aid to hegemon survivors and coalition civilians with equal efficiency and compassion. The galaxy thought humanity was lost when the Prometheus disappeared. But we weren't lost, Admiral. We were just learning to become something the universe had never seen before. A partnership between the greatest technology ever created and the species too stubborn to accept that anything is truly impossible. Admiral Zethkar nodded slowly. "And what happens now?" Sarah's smile held infinite possibilities. "Now, Admiral, we explore what happens when human dreams get million-year-old tools to work with. I have a feeling the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place. As the human fleet began its journey home, carrying news of a victory that would reshape galactic civilization, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter. Humanity had returned from the darkness not just intact, but transformed into something that could make the impossible routine. The Coalition would never again question humanity's contribution to galactic security. Because now everyone understood. When humans said something couldn't be done, they weren't stating a limitation. They were issuing a challenge. Importantly, we've proven we can improve it. The partnership is official. What does that mean for the Coalition? Admiral Zethkar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be comfortable. Captain Rodriguez smiled, and this time there was no mockery in it, only certainty. It means, Admiral, that humanity's contribution to galactic defense just became something more than adequate. And it means that the next time someone threatens Coalition space, they're going to discover that humans and architects together can do things that neither could manage alone. The assembled delegates began speaking all at once, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, excitement, and political calculation. But Sarah Chen wasn't listening to them. She was watching her former captain and crew, seeing the confidence that came from knowing they had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Humanity had been declared lost and powerless. They had returned as something entirely new. Newell tracked across the ship's surface, and strangest of all, there seemed to be additional ships flying in perfect formation with the supercarrier, vessels that followed no design philosophy any Coalition member recognized. Captain, Admiral Zethkar said slowly, what exactly did you encounter out there? Rodriguez's chuckle came through clearly. Let's just say that humanity just learned we're not the only species in the galaxy that believes in thinking outside the box. And Admiral, I think the Coalition's definition of adequate is about to change dramatically. As the Prometheus approached docking range, Sarah felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Whatever had happened to her former crewmates in the darkness between stars, they had clearly learned something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The human delegation had just been given back their voice. Now it remained to be seen what they would say with it.